So in this video, I want to review Ready Player One, a novel by Ernest Cline. Uh, it was published, I think, in 2011. Yeah, 2011. It's classified as, a science fiction story, an adventure, an action adventure story. Um, it was also made into a movie by Steven Spielberg. It was an alright movie. Um, so what I want to do is, I guess I should say, as I was reading this book, I was thinking about how to incorporate it into my class because we have a unit on science fiction. And so while I'm reading it, I'm looking at things to draw out of it to incorporate in some sort of activity that would inform students about science fiction and also about writing, literature, whatever. So, the first thing I want to say about this book is it's not bad. The second thing I want to say about this book is it's not good. And it's not science fiction, in my opinion, based on how I would define science fiction. It's science fiction-ish. There's qualities of science fiction, but I don't think it grapples with a science fiction theme. It's inside science fiction, but it is not science fiction. Why do I think Ready Player One is not a bad book? It is a good, straightforward, straight-moving story. It hits all the right plot targets. So, for instance, we get the exposition through this event. The event is that there is a video on his name's Holiday's death. Is that his name? James Holiday? Something like that. Anyway, I'll call him James. Jim for short. Holiday has died. And he has like this digital will, a video will, where he explains this contest and a few other things. And that, I think it's the first chapter or something like that. It really establishes a lot of things that are happening in the book. The plot, which is they're trying to solve this quest. The constant references to the 80s and video games and Dungeons and Dragons. All of that stuff is presented in this exposition, and it's done well. It's done well. It's executed fine. Also in the exposition, we find out that Wade will be getting the first key, will be the first one to discover this key. So, everything after that, if we say that that's the conflict of the story, that there's this game, I don't think that's actually the conflict. I think the conflict really occurs when Wade actually gets the key. The conflict in the story. But, then we have the section after that where we know Wade's going to get the key, but we learn about Wade and he's kind of a loser and he's poor and he lives in these trailer park skyscrapers. And that doesn't even make sense to me, but a lot of things don't make sense, but I'm kind of deviating. But anyway, my real point is that it hits all the right spots. When Wade gets the key, there's the relationship. The relationship falls apart. He gets into depression, and then he has to resurrect himself and do something very challenging, like what's the IOI? He goes into indentured servitude. He goes undercover to go after the antagonist corporation, so that. And my point I'm talking too much. My point is that this book hits all the right story points, story marks. Okay, and it's got the right tension where things are happening. So if we assume that this book is written for teenagers, and usually teenage boys, this book is a good read. Um, for those kinds of that kind of age group. It's a challenging read, uh, not just the size, but the narrative movement. Um, you know, it is a little bit challenging for a teenager. Maybe not all teenagers, but um, and if it's a book they're reading, it's a book they're reading for fun, so that's good. So I think it's a fun book for kids, young adults. Um, so in that sense, it's not a bad book. Now the problem with this book is it's just so hard to believe. Uh, it's very, very hard for me to believe so many things that are mutually exclusive. We have what is it? The Oasis, this vast virtual world of they have institutions like education, stores. This virtual reality um, is so abundant. You can go all over the space, all. But meanwhile, reality is experiencing plagues, experiencing war, famine. Governments are totally incapable. They're in states of collapse. They're totally incapable of governing. People are living very poor. I mean, living. They have like food rationings and and yet they. I don't know why. Why are the trailers stacked? Like, why? Okay, so my biggest problem is a post-apocalyptic world is not going to have a virtual reality that has so much abundance. I don't see that happening. If this Klein could have just had the story take place in a world where there's stability, but it's boring, like it's Finland, you know what I mean? And everybody's on this virtual reality. Um, and so, that would make more sense to me because then at least they have the technology. That's possible, but in a world is at war and famine, climate change. Nobody's gonna be playing video games. I'm sorry, people are gonna be rioting, or they're going to be figuring out some way to survive. And it's not going to be watching every episode of uh, uh, whatever that holiday guy likes. So there's just this implausibility that makes it very, very hard for me to give credit to any of the things that really happen. When Wade goes to underground, or not underground, when Wade goes to the I indentured servitude, they're handcuffing him, they're taking his fingerprints, blah blah blah, but they're not going to take his blood because there's been a law that's been passed that you can't take DNA. A corporation can't take DNA. Really? Really? A corporation? If they want to do it and there's the law, they just do it anyway. What reality are you in where corporations, major corporations that are already established as being greedy in the book, and it's the antagonist of the story, corporations like that aren't going to follow laws by governments that can't even feed its own people? Why? Why not just not bring up the fact that, just don't have them even go about taking blood. So then you don't have to say why the blood thing isn't happening. Um, just nobody's gonna stop and think why aren't they drawing blood? So those are the reasons why it's not good and it's not bad. It's not bad. It's got all the action adventure. It moves forward. It's a challenging book for young adults. Why it's bad, it's just completely implausible. And it's not even plausible through the backdrop of science. There is no real science here. There is just the manifestations, the commodification of science. um, so it's just science as a toy. Science is a thing that produces toys. So there's science in this book, but it's a slave. It's a slave to being played with, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But it doesn't function to carry my belief along through the story. Is this a good book? Is this a bad book? It's just a so-so book. If you're an adult, don't read this book unless you're a teacher or you've got kids that are reading this book. Don't read this book. If you're interested in the kind of things that are going on in this book, but you haven't started this book, read something else. You could read Neuromancer, which I'm not a big fan of, but it's a better book. And that has that virtual reality world. Earth Abides is a great post-apocalyptic world. Better than, more realistic than, more believable than Ready Player One. If you want the sort of action-adventure kind of game, the Stephen King book, The Running Man, is pretty good. I don't know if it's Stephen King or if it's his AKA, but that's pretty good. So those are 3 books I would recommend over this book. However, 15-year-old boy, go for it.